Hi everyone, in this part of the FPS tutorial series, we are going to implement the ability to drop and pick up weapons. So before we begin, let's see a higher level view of how we are going to implement this in our game. So you must have already seen this in part 2 of the series, but let us see it again to better understand how dropping and picking up of weapons is going to work. So let's start with dropping a weapon. For dropping, we are simply going to equip the weapon we want to drop, then press a key of your choice to drop the weapon. In my case, I am pressing G. Now for picking up a weapon, there are going to be a few conditions. First and foremost, we are going to check whether there is any empty slot or not. If there is, then we are going to pick up the new weapon and store it on the very first empty slot found in the loadout. So now if I try to switch this pistol with another pistol, considering they are both same, in that case we add ammo of the weapon we are going to pick up to the currently equipped weapon. Finally, if none of these conditions hold true, we simply swap currently equipped weapon with the one on the ground. And that's how we are going to set up dropping and picking up of weapons. So let's start by creating weapon pickups. For that we will have to duplicate the weapons we have created so far. You can duplicate them simply by saving it as a new scene. But for the ones we created at the end of the last video, for that we will have to duplicate them by opening the original file and saving it from over there. Now let's do a bit of cleanup here, as we don't require a lot of these nodes. But before doing anything, make sure you play the animation and bring weapon to its default position. After doing that, remove animation player node. Do note that animation player node should be the very first node you should remove, otherwise you will encounter some weird behavior with other instances of this model. Now move the mesh at the top and remove all other nodes from the scene. Then change the type of node from spatial to a rigid body and add a collision shape to it. Now we have to move both the mesh and collider a little bit to either left or right. The reason is that we want center of gravity of the weapon to be somewhere around the sides, and that's because center of gravity is determined by the origin of rigid body. So doing this ensures that weapon falls to the ground even if it hits the ground upside down. Now let's create a script for weapon pickup. And this is going to be used for all types of weapons. Let's start by creating weapon parameters. They contain values that will be transferred when we equip this weapon pickup or just add it as an ammo. Now I am going to connect the sleeping state signal of the rigid body to a function I am going to create just now. So this signal is emitted after the rigid body has been inactive for some time. So let's create the function on sleeping and set rigid body mode to static. So what we are trying to achieve is that when we drop a weapon, then it needs to fall on the ground, and for that we need a rigid body. But after some time it isn't required that weapon reacts to game physics. So that's why we are using this signal to disable the use of rigid body after certain period of inactivity. Now create a function to send data when we interact with this weapon pickup. Here we will simply return all the variables we have declared for weapon parameters. You will understand how it is all going to work in just a moment. Now let's set these weapon parameters from the inspector. Here I will like to point out that weapon name is going to identify each weapon by their associated key in the all weapons dictionary, which we created in weapon manager script. So weapon name should have a value equal to the key of that respective weapon. In this case we are going to write pistol_B for the following weapon pickup. I am going to leave other parameters like ammo in mag and extra ammo to their default values, but you can change them to any value you feel like. So that's all for this weapon. Now we are going to repeat the same exact process for other weapons as well. So just to give you an idea, I am going to open the original pistol which we created out of basic shapes. So to duplicate it, we can simply save it as a different scene, unlike the previous weapon where we had to duplicate it in a slightly different way. So I'm going to repeat the same process for all other weapons. So I will skip ahead to the part where I have finished creating the weapon pickups for all the weapons. So after creating all weapon pickups for each of the weapons, let's open Armed.gd and add a reference to weapon pickup. Then create a vector 3 called equip pose. This will be used to set weapon's position after it is instantiated. So let's fill these values for all the weapons. Here in equip pose we have to input values of the offset of the weapon from camera. Since all of our weapons are already at their place, we can simply copy their positions to equip position parameter. And don't forget to assign the weapon pickup we created. So let's do the same thing for all other weapons. Now back to the Armed script, let's create a function for dropping a weapon. So first of all, we are going to instantiate the weapon pickup. For its position, we are going to set it to this weapon's position minus the direction of forward z-axis with respect to the player. This will instantiate weapon pickup a little bit ahead of this weapon we have equipped. Then we are going to assign current values of our weapon to the weapon pickup node. And finally remove this node from the tree. Now let's create actions for dropping and picking up weapons. Now in Weapon Manager, create drop weapon function similar to how we did with other functions like firing and reloading. Here we call current weapons drop weapon function only if our active slot is not set to empty, that is to unarmed. After this we have to set current weapon slot and current weapon to empty and unarmed. This is because when we drop a weapon, we are changing back to unarmed. Finally, we are going to update the HUD. Now back to the player script, let's head over to process weapon function. Here we call drop weapon function when we press the drop action we defined. As you can see, the weapon drops when I press the G key. You can see that weapon is still moving when I collide with it. So let's wait for a few seconds and see what happens. Now the weapon no longer moves, as the sleeping signal must have been called. So we have finished implementing weapon dropping. Now let's implement picking up of weapons. First of all, in ready function, we are going to put the code of weapon initialization in a function of its own. And don't forget to call weapon setup in the ready function. Now let's define a function which will be responsible for adding new weapons. For now though, I'm going to leave it empty. Now let's create a switch weapon function which is going to decide what to do with weapon pickup when we interact with it by pressing E or any other key you set. Also, the function parameter weapon data is the dictionary we will get through weapon pickup. So for our first condition, we traverse the weapons dictionary and check if any of its item is null or not. If it's null, then we straight away add weapon pickup to the slot, and how the slot is decided is going to be defined in add weapon function, which we are going to create in just a moment. And finally we return out of the function. For the second condition, we check whether the equipped weapon is unarmed or not. If it is, then we straight away swap the weapon in primary slot with the one on the ground, that is the weapon pickup. So first we drop the weapon in primary slot and then wait for a frame to complete the deletion process of previous weapon. Then we simply add weapon pickup by calling add weapon function. For our third condition, we check weapon name of current weapon and weapon pickup. So if both are equal, that means they are the same weapons, and in that case we add ammo of weapon pickup to our current weapon. Otherwise, if all the above conditions fail, then we simply do a weapon swap by dropping current weapon, waiting for a frame, adding weapon pickup to the loadout. And that's all for the switch weapon function. Now let's define the add weapon function. So first of all, we traverse through all weapons dictionary and check whether there is any element with weapon name as a key or not. So if there's no element found, then we return out of the function. And that's why it is important to have same weapon names for weapon and weapon pickups as defined in all weapons dictionary. So if there does exist a weapon, then we check whether our primary slot is empty or not. As we are calling this function after the weapon is dropped, then either of the slots, that is the primary or secondary, or maybe both, should be null already. So first we instantiate the weapon from the weapon name we got through weapon data dictionary. Set its position to 0 in all 3 axes and set the parent to weapons node itself. After the weapon is instantiated, we call weapon setup function, which initializes the variables of the Armed script attached to the weapon. Now we set other variables of the weapon by assigning values from weapon data dictionary. Then we set weapon's position to equip position, which will offset the weapon from camera. Then we set primary slot to the newly instantiated weapon and call change weapon function to equip the new weapon. Then finally we return out of the function. Now for the secondary slot, I am going to be lazy and copy all of the lines of primary slot and paste it as a separate condition for secondary. Here we just have to rename primary to secondary in all places where we are accessing the weapons dictionary, and that's pretty much it. But you can do it however you feel like, and it will work just fine. So that's all for this function. Now let's go to the HUD scene and create an interaction prompt. So I'm going to quickly create a basic UI by using color rect and label nodes. Now let's open the HUD script and create functions for showing and hiding the prompt. Here the description parameter is set to the label inside the interaction prompt. Now back to Weapon Manager, let's create functions for the interaction prompt. Here we set the description to add ammo if current weapon's name is equal to the weapon pickup name. Otherwise we set it to equip. And finally call show interaction prompt of the HUD script. Similarly create a function for hiding as well. And here simply call the function itself. Now we just have to create one more function. Process weapon pickup is going to be called every frame and will be responsible for handling the logic of weapon pickup. So first let us set up some variables for the raycast. From will hold the starting position, whereas to will hold the target position. Then set up the raycast with variables we created as the argument. So if the collision detects an object, we store its collider in a variable and check if the collided object has method getWeaponPickupData in it. This is the method we created inside the weapon pickup script. So if the object does have that method, then that means it's a weapon pickup. So we simply call that method and store the return value, that is the dictionary, in a variable called weapon data, and then call showInteractionPrompt by passing weapon name as an argument. Then if we press the interact key, in my case it's the E key, then we call switchWeapon function with weapon data as the argument, and finally remove weapon pickup from the tree. In case the detected object didn't have a method, that means it was not a weapon pickup. So in that case we simply call hideInteraction method. And finally we are going to call this function from player.gd. So that's all for now. But before we go and test the game, I will like to point out a thing about Weapon Manager. As we can see, we have all these weapon nodes over here, but it is not necessary to have them in our tree, as the only required node is the unarmed node. So say if I removed all weapon nodes from over here, then what change should we do in our code? Well, that's pretty simple. All we have to do is set primary and secondary slots to null in weapons dictionary. But for now, I'm going to undo it. So the point is that you don't need to have all weapons stacked up inside the weapons node. Though for now, I'm going to leave them as it is. So let's get back to where we left off. So we have finished writing the code part. Now let's go to the world scene and add some weapon pickups in it. Okay, so I did a little mistake over here. I passed weapon key to the function rather than the weapon node itself, as that is what the function needs as an argument. So let's run the game again and see the result. Here we go, everything is working just as we want. So we have finished implementing, dropping and picking up of weapons. In the next part, I'm going to add some extra touch to the game, like weapon ADS, head bobbing and a variety of other improvements that would make the game feel much more alive. So I hope this video helped you, and if you have any questions or feedback, then feel free to tell me in the comment section down below. So then I will see you in the next part.